turn on the recording. So today we're talking about differentiation. I'm Heather Brown. I work with the Illinois State Board of Education through ISU. And Janine, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Janine Shepard. I'm a math and science content specialist in Southern Illinois, but right now I'm in Bloomington.
And I am up in Northern Illinois, north of Chicago. We are both math content specialists. She is currently at a conference, which is why she will stay on mute for most of it. We will be asking you to join in and unmute yourself. If you can't use your camera or your mic for some reason, we are already starting to use a chat window, so you can feel free to keep using that. We have two people here that are going to help, two guests today, two invited guests. There will hopefully be more guests showing up that are going to join us today. Glennah McMahon is from Hawthorn Middle School North, and she will be representing middle school. Dana Cartier is a former high school teacher and a K-12 math specialist, so she will be giving some examples from high school and making some notes about things that are universal for K-12. So before we get started, I just want to talk real quick, give another minute for people to join as well. The purpose of IL MathCom is really for teachers to share the wonderful things that they're doing across the state. So we really believe that in Illinois, there are a lot of great things that are already happening. Janine and I both go around the state doing trainings, but we think there are plenty of things we can learn from each other. And so we have created IL MathCom to share the wonder and beauty of mathematics, as we like to say. So protocol will be, if you are not talking, for you to keep your mics on mute. If we need help with that, if we start to hear background noise, Janine does have the capability to mute you, which you will use. If you are talking or have something to say, we will certainly let you speak. So we will give Glennah a few minutes to kind of talk through, she has some slides she wants to share, some examples of differentiation, and then we'll give Dana a few minutes to do that as well. And then we will have just an open conversation where we would love, if you have ideas for differentiation, you can certainly share them. If you have questions about differentiation, you can also share those questions, and we will have the opportunity to kind of just talk through it. So the first few minutes, like I said, we'll have each of us talk, or each of our invited guests talk, and then we'll open up to everyone. Just a disclaimer before we start, because I know that some talk about curriculum and other things will come out, is that anything that our invited guests bring, the State Board of Education and ISU are not necessarily endorsing, but we are super glad that people are telling us what they're doing. I will be sharing a link right now into our forum, and as people add, I will share it again to that's our general IL MathCom page, which has our forum on it. I will right now, while you guys get started, start a forum for today's conversation. So as people are talking about resources, I will jot them down in the forum. If you have questions or answers or comments you want to make, that's a great place to do it. The chat window will disappear at the end of the meeting, whereas the forum will be live, and we have 50, 60, 70 views of the forum after the fact. So please take that in. So without further ado, Glennah, do you want to just introduce yourself again? Tell us a little bit about you, and then go ahead and get started.
All right, so my name is Glennah McMahon. I am a 6th grade math teacher at Hawthorn Middle School North in Vernon Hills. I'm in a new position this year, so I'm teaching 6th grade math this year, 3 sections of 6th grade, then 1 section of advanced, which would be 7th grade standards. And over the last 3 years, I actually taught at the Hawthorn South School, and I taught both math and science. So I've been teaching 4 years. I graduated from Illinois State, actually, in Bloomington in 2015, and I'm just teaching and figuring things out as I go. All right, so I'm going to share some things that I do in my classroom. I've got a presentation put together. Heather, if you want to link that presentation that I sent you earlier, all of the documents and pictures that I'm going to show you are clickable links. So you can actually click and see view only documents if you're curious to see anything blown up or like that. Okay?
I will put that in the forum right now. So anybody that needs it, it is there.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with this presentation. Can you guys see that? Can somebody tell me? Because I can't see you.
Yes,
put you
we
on
can
full
see
screen?
it.
Okay, good. So I'm going to be talking about some differentiated instruction that I've done through the lens of personalized learning. So I know personalized learning is kind of a hot button topic right now in education. It's a really big push through our school district that we're integrating into our classrooms. And our school district really wants us, instead of doing a one-size-fits-all curriculum or a one-size-fits-certain groups curriculum, they really want it to be more one-size-fits-one, where we're meeting the needs of our students on as individualized as possible, okay? So I start my year by really stressing the importance of a growth mindset to all my students. We do daily mini lessons focusing on developing and strengthening their growth mindset and getting them to really switch between the fixed mindset or to a growth mindset. I utilize the book, The Growth Mindset Coach by Annie Brock and Heather Hudley. If you haven't read that, it's an awesome book and I would highly suggest it. And, you know, I have a lot of conversations with my kids, and I'm going to keep coming back to this while I'm talking, but I have a lot of conversations with my students about accepting all learning levels and how we should never be embarrassed about what level we're starting at, because it's completely about the growth that we're making throughout the year and throughout our math units that really matters. All right, so all of my units start with pre-assessments. These are broken down. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but they're broken down by topic. And then what I do with their pre-assessments is I grade them on a 4, 3, 2, or 1. So we're not standards-based in my district, but I basically grade their pre-test on a standards-based system. This is something new that I'm trying this year. So I took one of my latest pre-assessments and threw it in here. If you're looking at the link that Heather shared in the forum, you can actually click on it and go to my exact spreadsheet that I've used. But based on the students' understanding that they show in each question, I give them a 4, 3, 2, or 1. It's all color coordinated, so my 3s and my 4s are more of like a bluish green, while my 1s and my 2s are more of like a reddish orange. This allows me, prior to the unit, to really look at my kids, look at their prior understanding and their levels, and break it down by topic and by standard so that I know what my students need on a whole class level, on a small group level, and on an individual level. Something new that I'm starting this year that I'm really excited about, actually I just started this week, is having my students graph their own pretest data. So I share this spreadsheet. I use conditional formatting when I'm making the spreadsheets. So when they put in a number, it automatically color codes the cell. And so I've shared this with my kids, and I'm giving them their pretest to look over and, you know, look at their assessments, and they're actually filling out the spreadsheet on their own individual level. And then at the end of the units, we're also going to fill out their post-test data so that we're graphing their growth. I'm graphing their growth, and so are they. So I'm super excited about that. We'll see how it goes.
So before you click to the next, okay,
yes,
or can you
I can
go back
back.
to?
Yes.
So tell me again, maybe I missed this because I was typing in the forum, but each of these columns, because they are kind of small, I know you said we can click through them. So what do each of these columns represent, or give us an example of what a few of these columns represent?
Okay, so this is my, for my 7th grade course, this is my percent proportions pretest that I gave. And they were just broken down by question. But by question, I'm also gauging what topic I'm assessing there. Okay, so they're not quite broken down by standard, but they're grouped by color, by topic, and then it's easy for me to look at the standards and identify exactly what questions and what data I need to look at prior to creating my lessons for the unit. Okay.
Got it. Great. Yeah, thanks.
And I can look and see that, when we're talking percent increase and decrease, almost all of my kids here were not showing understanding. But if we're talking about, converting fractions to percents or percents to fractions, a lot of them are coming in with proficiency or close to proficiency. So this is a skill that I wouldn't need to go over that much in class, or I would just give to the few kids that have not reached proficiency on that topic yet.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So another thing that I'm starting this year that I'm super excited is having students self-assess themselves. And I promise all of this is going to tie into my differentiation. So just bear with me. But students are self-assessing their understanding through different levels of understanding. Again, those stem back to a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. Students through in-class discussions are gaining a strong understanding of each level and what evidence they would need in order to prove their level. And then the goal is for all students to demonstrate at least a 3 or a 4, so a proficient or a distinguished level before they're moving on to the next topic. Okay, this is all conversations that I have in class with my kids. And one thing that I'm going to stem back to is that, I talk endlessly with my kids about how if they start at a 1 or a 2, that's okay, because it's all about the amount of growth that they make. If they start at a 3, that's fantastic. They should be pushing themselves towards a level 4 or an expert or distinguished level. These levels of understanding are just something that I bought off Teachers Pay Teachers from Cootie and Cutie. So if you're interested in those, definitely go check them out. Okay? So like I said, I'm really focusing on differentiating through the lens of personalized learning. So some of the major ways that I've done this is through different learning paths, which I try to include multiple modalities in each learning path, and I'll show you some examples of those. I've utilized some self-paced curriculum. I don't do that all the time because it's tough for kids to do all the time, and especially with 6th graders, it's tough for them to have that student agency to be successful in that. And then something that I'm starting to dip my toes into this year is choice in how my students demonstrate mastery. So I'm kind of differentiating their levels of their quizzes and giving them or their formative assessments and giving them some choice in how they want to show that level of understanding. Okay, so the first thing I'll talk about is my student learning paths. These learning paths allow for differentiated levels. It allows for multiple modalities for kids that have different interest levels or different learning styles. It allows for student choice, and then it also allows for self-assessment, which is a really important part of my class. The paths are assigned both through pretest data and through self-assessment. So for certain kids, I will assign them a path that they're working on or a level that they're working on. And for other classes, for my more mature or advanced, I don't want to say advanced, for my classes that have a stronger level of student agency, they can actually choose their level based on their own self-assessment of their skills. Class growth mindset conversations are always happening during these, so we're talking about the different levels and how we're all human beings and we're all learning at different rates and we're starting at different places, and that's okay, because then again, it comes back to the growth that we're showing throughout the unit, okay? This is a learning path that I did earlier this school year on long division. So I had different colors, and the colors meant nothing based on level. I made that very, very clear to my kids. The yellow path was just division with 1-digit divisors. The green path was division with whole number quotients. The purple path was division with decimal quotients. The blue path was division with rounded decimals. The red path was some enrichment. So my kids got a little slip, a learning path slip with, they either self-assessed or I gave them a slip with where they were starting and what level they were starting at. And they had some different criteria that they had to meet before moving on to the next path level. And then our end goal was to get to the red path, which was long division enrichment. Okay. Another way that I've used personalized learning to differentiate from my students is self-paced lessons. This has been a work in progress for sure. I started this last year. I think I did 3 self-paced units all year, and they've gotten better and better as I've gone. So pretest data determines the student's learning material. I use, similarly to the long division learning path cards that I showed you on the last slide, I use, I call them personalized learning cards that communicate to students based on their pretest data what they need to, what lessons they need to work on. So I'll look at their pretest, I'll print these off, I'll put a kid's name up here and I'll highlight, okay, you could skip to the lesson 1 homework because you've already shown understanding of one-step equations on your assessment, so you can do some homework, and then as soon as you feel ready, you can do the check, and then when you're ready to move on to lesson 2 and lesson 3 and lesson 4, they're just doing those highlighted sections. But the checks at the end of each lesson are mandatory to make sure that kids are fully understanding the concept before they're moving on. Students are staying on task in class by filling out a daily objective log. So this is an example that I had from last year. It was broken down by day, and kids had to set like a daily intention or a daily goal, and then they had to reflect at the end of the class period if they met their goal or not. If they didn't meet their goal, what are they planning to complete at homework, and then for homework, and then at the end of each day, I would go through and check my kids to see where they were at. So with these objective logs, I would give kids suggested due dates, but again, with that differentiated piece, I really wanted kids to be able to move at their own pace. Again, I would give them suggested due dates saying, you really need to be at this point on this day, and I would be able to gauge their speed or where they were at based on their lesson checks at the end of each lesson and the subjective log. Any students that were falling behind, I was able to pull into small groups and work with them individually. So that was helpful as well.
Hey, Glennah, before you move on, are these on, I know your school is one-to-one Chromebook. So is this information on the computer, or is this like printed material that you share with them?
The lesson material or the objective logging cards?
Both.
Okay, so the objective logs are done on Chromebooks because they're done electronically so that they can submit them. Last year I was using Canvas. This year I'm using Google Classroom, so they can submit them to me. I can check over them at night, and then I automatically have a group of kids that I know that I need to pull the next day. Or I can tell, I've got a large group of kids that are all working on multi-step equations. So I can sit them together the next day and, check in with them, make sure that they know that they can turn to each other. I can do a live lesson with them where, I'm going through some examples and things like that. So the objective log is online. The student cards, I guess I've always done them on paper, but I could do them online now that I'm thinking about it, and then kids wouldn't lose them in their messy binders. So maybe I'll look into that. The work itself, I'm kind of a strong believer that kids should be doing math, paper, pencil. There have been kids in the past that I've offered electronic forms, or depending on the unit, sometimes I'll offer electronic forms of the notes in practice. But that kind of depends on what we're learning. But usually I always offer a paper copy, and then if a kid wants an online version, they can have that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So then another thing that I'm trying this year, which is super exciting, is having them choose, have some choice in their assessment style. So involving student choice and self-assessment. So one lesson that I did earlier this year with my 7th grade students was on slope, and as their formative exit slip, I gave them 3 different options. The first option was a find the error problem, where they had to figure out where the work went wrong in the problem. The second problem was a Dan Myers problem, so it was more project or problem based, where they had to use some higher order of thinking skills. And then the third problem was where they just got to choose their own way of demonstrating mastery of that topic before moving on. So that's something new I'm trying, which is kind of cool. So basically, end all be all, I'm just trying to use student pre-assessment data and self-assessment to figure out where kids are at on at least a small group level, if not an individual level. And then I'm trying to provide them with instruction that's appropriate for their level based on that. Okay. Alrighty. Last thing, if you're interested in following my journey, I just started a teacher Instagram. So I'm just putting a plug in there. If you're interested in following and seeing what I'm up to, feel free to follow me. It's Ms. Personalized Learning. Or if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. Okay. Any questions?
Thanks. Well, does anybody have any instant questions? Otherwise, we will go to Dana and have an open discussion afterwards. Is that okay? And full disclosure, I do have to say that the reason I invited Miss McMahon is because, not the reason, is because I know that she does develop excellent relationships with her students, because my son did have her last year and he was in the wonderful class that she talked about.
And yes, he was a wonderful student.
He's a good kid.
Yes.
So we will transition to Dana Cartier, who's been working in K-12 math for many, many years. And at one point was a high school teacher before she went to become a K-12 math specialist. So Dana, do you wanted to share your screen as well?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. Then we'll go through that and then we'll open it up to any questions or discussions that anybody wants to have afterwards. Thanks.
Okay, let me move it so I'm not staring at the screen over to the side. Okay, so I have a couple of things that are specific for high school, but in truth, I'm going to talk about these in a very general sense. When I think about differentiation, I think really the very first thing you have to think about as a teacher is, what is the goal? So to answer that question, I have a couple of questions up here that I think are critical to being able to be prepared to really have your kids reach that goal. And the first is, what is the standard that you're teaching, that your kids are working on, and that you are hoping that they can master? That sounds so silly and so obvious, and yet it can easily fall by the wayside because you can get caught up in the different types of activities and tasks that different curriculum have, and you can find really great ways to make the problem more accessible to a student, but if you're not really always thinking about it from the standard aspect, you might not make the differentiation in a meaningful way to really help kids master that standard.
Can you hold on for a second?
Mm-hmm.
I'm only seeing like a third of the page. Are other people seeing the same thing?
What?
Okay. Yeah, I'm only seeing like the center.
Well, I don't know how to. Okay.
Do you want to stop sharing and then try to reshare again?
Yes, I can do that now that I've gotten rid of everything. Hold on.
Okay.
Maybe now that it's on this side, it'll work.
I just didn't want you to go through your whole presentation with nobody being able to see what you did.
That's important.
That's better. I can see it now. Now it says
all right. And
Great.
Every time I move anything, everything goes. Okay. So these are the big questions that I asked myself when I was in the classroom, and certainly things that I encourage teachers currently to jot down and think about for their lesson planning, so that they can really be prepared to differentiate kind of on the spot. Because if these are really strong in your mind as you're teaching for that particular lesson, it makes it a little bit easier to make decisions on the fly as to how to help each student. So what is the standard? What should kids be able to know and do by the end of the lesson? And what standards lead to the work that you're actually doing? So that coherence piece that we tend to talk about now with our standards. So great. So I wanted to give a couple examples, and I picked a CED1. This is the standard itself, and it's a pretty straightforward one. So I figure this one is a good one for us all to talk through. It's nothing too crazy or too high schooly. All in all, I could have picked a lot more difficult ones, but I think this one will give us a good starting point and lots to talk about. So as you can see, the standard create equations and inequalities in one variable and use them to solve problems. Right? It seems pretty straightforward, and it seems like something that you don't have to think that much about as you go through. But a lot of the problems and tasks that you see in curriculum these days, and even not just these days, but in the past, when they're addressing this particular concept, they don't always address the full intent of the standard, and it is easy to see problems kind of venture off into different areas of mathematics, which often you see in the materials to be preparing kids for differentiation, to give them different opportunities to work with the standard, but they're not actually working with the standard. So I wanted us to just take a couple examples. So all three of these examples that I have come from illustrative math, and they actually are all three to this particular standard. But I just wanted to have us talk a little bit about like some ways you could differentiate. So everyone can see the problem, so I'm not going to read it to you, but I want to give like pause for you to think about this problem and think about the standard itself that I just had on the screen, and let's discuss some like options of things that you could do in your classroom with your students to help differentiate. So I'm going to let anyone jump in and give some answers.
So anyone that wants to unmute at this time, if you are unable to unmute and want to type something into the chat, I have it open and I can certainly share that. Otherwise, you'll have to hear my answers for everything. But one of the things I would say is you can change the numbers, right? So one of the things you can do to make things, you can do the same mathematics with numbers that are cleaner. This one's not too bad. But especially when we see ones that are decimals and fractions and things like that versus just giving somebody whole numbers. I believe it's Claire that said, replace the variables with real numbers. I think that's true. I think if you use any one of these by themselves, good.
Man, I was trying to get to the chat thing and it wouldn't, now the chat's just in the middle of my screen, so I can't read my stuff, but that's okay. Yeah, so changing the numbers for sure. So this one's actually a really good example of like pretty friendly numbers all in all, especially by the time they're in high school. Like we are hoping that most of our students feel comfortable with numbers like this. However, 15 million is not an easy number to wrap your head around, nor is it all that easy to like keep track of all the zeros as you're doing the mathematics. So there's no harm in changing these numbers to be easier to work with. The point of this is not to see what numbers they can use in these problems. The point is to work, again, let's go backwards and see, will it let me go backwards? Nope. Yes, to create equations, and I can't read anything because my screen's covered by chat boxes.
You can close the chat window. I will let you know if someone writes you a message.
Thank you so much. All right, create equations and inequalities in one variable and use them to solve problems, right? So nothing in this particular standard is saying that you have to use a certain set of numbers. That being said, in high school, we do have an expectation because of the other standards that you are using, beyond whole numbers that are within 100. But certainly to start and to develop their skills in doing this, you can use easier numbers and have students work that way. Anybody else have any suggestions?
Could you highlight any important information? I mean, obviously they're trying to write an equation from this, but I'm wondering if you could highlight important numbers and variables and things like that that they would need in order to write that equation.
Sure, absolutely you could do that. And I would encourage having your students try that on their own to start with. That would be the first step in differentiating, I believe. And you can kind of check that to make sure that they're matching things up properly. And if they're still struggling, then I think absolutely to provide a few of them highlighted, that would be helpful. I would advise not to jump directly to highlighting all of them or to be putting all of the numbers into the equation for them right away. But I think adding a few at a time to help students just get more comfortable with it is an okay thing to do for students who are struggling with the problem as is.
And Mary Grace said, yes, this was what I was just going to say. I do this as a strategy with my 3rd and 4th graders. Circle, underline, and highlight, and I think, I think some of that is letting them do it, and some of it is seeing what they need help with.
Right. And I think, the conversation then is really about how they all fit together and not about the strategy itself, right? And I've seen that play out in classrooms quite a bit where the strategy of like underlining or highlighting becomes more of the focus. And I think for any strategy, the goal here is to really help provide ways for students to learn the mathematics. And so the focus should still be on the math, but strategies are there to help them find accessible ways to approach the mathematics. So I think as long as that conversation is constantly going that way, and again, trying to see, do you have to give them all of it, or can you kind of step them in with pieces at a time? I think that's all really good. Yep. Another thing you might find with some of your students is that the language of this, although fairly straightforward in truth, may not be very meaningful to some students. So you might find it easier if they talk about ways that they can rewrite the problem, so they're not talking about fighter planes and they're not talking about wheat, right? So that might be a difficult thing for some students to sort of get beyond, especially with the numbers being this big. So another option, as opposed to changing the numbers, is to sort of change the context to make it more just approachable for them and something that they recognize and address in their normal life. Yep. Any other comments before I move on? Because now I can't see anybody or any chats. Or
No, you're doing great.
Okay.
I think what you just said is true. I mean, I think like when you look at this, like the equation that they're providing you, b equals xz plus yw, seems a lot more daunting than just we're buying two things that cost different amounts. You know what that, and that's really kind of what the, like, so having students kind of think about what that means and changing the scenario to just two things that they would buy, and how much of them they would buy would make them more approachable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would stay with them a little bit longer too, right? And because I think we all have that. Once you really understand what the equation is saying, then the numbers are much easier to deal with, right? It's that understanding, that appreciation of what the equation and all those letters really mean. Okay, so here's another one. Again, this is the exact same standard that it's addressing. You can see the problem's slightly different. What are some suggestions here?
We didn't say this last time, but I think it could be true for the last time. Do any of you guys find that kids get overwhelmed by the fact that this is a good resource for people, but it has 3 different problems, right? Like, and so did the last one. And sometimes it just showing them one problem at a time, especially a kid who needs like the space to work it out. I find being, thinking of my own children when I was a teacher, sometimes that's really useful.
I think it's a really good point, Heather. I will add a caveat to that if you are going to do all of these and do them on like paper, for example, then the top part of the problem needs to be at the top of each of it. It's really hard for students to sometimes pull all that information over to the next page.
Yeah.
And I think we see that in assessment. So it's not the worst thing to have them practice, but I would be prepared to see that in your class and help them feel more comfortable maybe at the beginning of the year by providing that on the top of each page, and then so slowly sort of weaning them off of that and helping them to remember to bring over that information from the previous page.
Right. And definitely with this one, the point for C is to, kind of extrapolate to a variable instead. So I think it is useful to have the examples before it, but just kind of giving them space sometimes is the only thing. Or if you're showing it on a slide like this, having like them fly in one at a time,
Right. Absolutely. So like the one previously, you can change the numbers a little bit. The cost of the car could be a little tricky for some. You could have that to be a slightly more friendly number. The decimals could be modified a bit. What other suggestions?
Mary Grace wrote, I hope that's your name, that's what I have on my slides, is for struggling students, sometimes it's useful to give them the first step on the first one to get them going, and then they're more likely to work through the others on their own. And I'm sure that all of us would agree that sometimes we want to let them struggle, but absolutely, I mean, there's a reason oftentimes we give them multiple examples, right? So sometimes you need more scaffolding on the first one. That was all the chats.
Oh, okay. Well, along with that scaffolding, I think another one would be to really help pause the students after a while and make sure that they've all come up with an equation that's similar, and then talk about sort of the differences between how they came up with their equations. Their equation will probably be pretty similar. But they may have gotten there differently. So to have them sort of talk all that out before letting them finish and get to their final answer, or before all of them would have perhaps gotten there. Go ahead and pause the whole classroom and have them talk about it and make sure that everyone has an equation to work with as they move forward.
I can see, this is more of an extension idea, but I could see my students asking, I wonder what the interest rate is here where we live. And then I wonder, like, maybe have them look up a car that they would be interested in buying. So then they would be calculating the sales tax on something that would interest them, right?
I think that's a great idea, Janine, and it's definitely something I thought of when I looked at this problem too, that I would send that as like their homework problem, right? I generally, when I was in the classroom, didn't send home a lot of homework, but if it's something that I find engaging for them and can get them to just repeat a little bit of what we've done, then I think that's great. So to just send them home and say, like, find the price of a car that you'd want and figure out what our sales tax is, and work that into your equation to figure out all the information, right?
Yeah. And using like 10%, did you already say this? I'm sorry. Like I said, I'm trying to read the chat.
Oh yeah, I was just change. You can change the numbers to a different percent or a different price of the car. Either
right.
way. I
and
wouldn't do both to start with if you don't have to.
Right. But using 10%, because most kids understand that it's just, moving a decimal place, because then it kind of helps you estimate. So you can kind of think about, that also helps you recognize whether your the other values that you pick are reasonable answers.
Absolutely. And again, a similar type, just questioning structure for your students when you're kind of pausing at different points would be, now that we have answers for Arizona and New York, how do our answers make sense? Like, in estimating that, did we see the results the way we expected them to be? So I think there's some good questions there to just help guide their thinking and help them stay on track. And to reinforce this questioning of their own thinking, right? Where they want to go and check their own answers. Yep. Great. I think this context is actually generally a good one for high school students. Most high school students have a bit of an obsession with cars, although I understand from recent research that's becoming less and less true, as they all prefer to like take an Uber or a Lyft or something. But I think it still resonates with students, and I think that you certainly could change the context, but I think this would be a pretty solid one for most students. All right, last one of my examples. Again, this is for ACED 1, so we're just writing and solving linear equations and inequalities.
My initial thought looking at this is a lot of twos and halves. And sometimes the more of the same number you have, especially when it's written out, the harder it is to follow.
Yeah, I think it's very true to say that the fact that you don't actually see any numbers here, that everything's written out, is going to be something that you would consider differentiating for students, right? That is a really tricky thing for a lot of kids.
My thing with this one is that there's a lot of different statements that are like all mushed together. So I'm wondering if even just a really easy modification would just be splitting this up into steps or more bulleted sections to allow kids to break apart what it's asking.
Absolutely, those are absolute options that you can do. I would be wary to put too many steps in for students, right? Unless you have done some other differentiation techniques in there and you find that they're still really struggling. Part of what we want to see, especially in high school, is their ability to sort of formulate the problem and the equations from what's written in front of them. But certainly there's ways to do that without telling them, do this, do that, do this, do that, right? Just to help break up the different sentences and help them sort of write little things to the side to help after each sentence, right?
Yeah, just putting it as bullets visually would help them. Also, I think asking students to draw helps, like asking them to draw what's being asked and what they're doing here helps. Yeah.
So unlike the first example, you'll also see that it doesn't tell them the equation, right? And it doesn't give them variables. That's something that you can help them with too. You can help define a variable and help set that up. And it could just be that there's sort of like sentence starters for that. So you don't have to do all the work, but you are reminding them that they're going to have to define some variables and that here are the types of variables that they're going to need, or like what they're going to be using variables for. I will say this is a difficult problem. This is not a starting place for a CED1, but it's certainly an appropriate one for that particular standard. So it's still, there's still lots of options for differentiating it, but it wouldn't be where I would begin my lesson. So this one is a bit more of an extension, and certainly towards the end of students' mastery to begin with. But that doesn't mean that all students will be able to approach this at the same time, right? So you may have to differentiate a little bit as you go through this problem. Any other comments or questions?
Nothing else in the chat.
All right. Again, I would say that you may find, if you live in a city, that your students won't particularly relate to the farming and harvesting type problem. Feel free to change the context or to have them change the context, right? I think that's fine too. And in fact, having them change it and listening to them kind of talk that through will help others in the class, as well as help your students really understand what the question's asking. All right, so those are some examples. And again, you'll see that all of our differentiating techniques that we talked about were specific to that standard, right? So none of our suggestions took away from the intent of the standard itself. And so I think that's a really important thing to always be thinking about. One of the things I mentioned that's important when you're differentiating is thinking about where that standard came from. And so that the standard itself may be not where the students are struggling. It may be in some kind of skill or understanding that they didn't fully master before they got to your classroom. So looking at that coherence is really a helpful way to think about how you can differentiate. It is important that when you are doing lessons that you're still having all your students work with the standards at grade level, but that doesn't mean you aren't providing some additional help or structure that addresses those standards that they might not have fully mastered. So knowing which ones that they might just need a little help on so that they can actively participate in the standards that they are supposed to be learning in your class that day is just a helpful thing to keep in mind. So I'm sure everyone has seen this, and it's the Achieve the Core website, and they have a coherence map. It's pretty fantastic, actually. And I recognize that I said I was doing high school, and the coherence map currently only is K-8, but their high school map is complete. It just hasn't been posted here yet. So that is coming very soon. So keep an eye out for that, high school math teachers. There's a lot to come with high school on student achievement partners in the future here. However, even with this one, you can still see bits and pieces of what we're kind of talking about. So you can see over to the right-hand side our CED1 standard right here, and it is connecting back here to AE7. And you can, oh, I forgot I'm not live on the website. I'm actually on a screen. So you can go through that. Actually, let's go. Let me do that. I think that would be better. How do I stop sharing now that I've lost all my stuff?
Yeah, Glennah asked if we could share the link to the coherence map. I'm going to put it in the forum.
Yeah, well, you can put my PowerPoint in there too if you'd like. That's fine. All the links are in there.
All right, I'll do that.
If I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen now. You know, I used to be on this. Here we go. Just stop sharing. Let's go live to the actual coherence map. That will be helpful. Yeah, I might have too many tabs open. Here, can you guys see the website now?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. So when you click on the different pieces here, a whole bunch of information comes up. And as you can see, to the right is where it's going, to the left is where it came from. There's a whole bunch of information when you first get onto this site that talks you through like what a dotted line means compared to a solid line and things like that. So it's worth taking some time just to get comfortable with all the different pieces of this website. But as you can see, they have the standard here. They have a task. And you can download that and you can look at some additional tasks and park items. And then it goes on to talk about like focus. Is this major work and things like that? So this is a really helpful website to look through. Right now for high school, you have to do a little bit of just guessing, and it turns out it's not particularly difficult to do that. So I knew what standard we were looking at, and I looked at the 8th grade standards, and this seemed like a very reasonable one that would link to it, and sure enough, it did. So you can go and look at that and click it that way. But you can see that this particular standard in 8th grade actually leads to a variety of standards in high school. And so it is an important one for students to be able to do. That being said, I just want to reiterate this idea, though, that having students struggle with their 8th grade standards doesn't mean your class will now be working on an 8th grade standard. It's how to help figure out ways to make them more comfortable with that as they are actually working on that high school standard. So you need to help all students work on grade level material.
Dana, I just want you to know that you got several nods when you were saying that. So since you can't see everybody's faces because you're showing your screen.
Yeah, good. So this website takes a lot of time to get used to. There's just so many parts to it, and it can be quite overwhelming. But you can zoom out and see how the map continues to grow, and you can move things from up here. But I encourage people to spend some time on here. And again, like I said, the high school one is coming relatively soon. I don't have a time frame on that, but I know that it's created, so it should be released. I'm assuming this school year.
There's a really great, I don't know if it's an article or a resource on achievethecore.org for differentiating within the grade level too, that goes along with that. So I reference it a lot.
Yeah, there actually are several. I wasn't sure which one to best reference for this particular thing today. So maybe, Janine, you want to put in the link for the one that you're thinking of to your site. That'd be great. Okay, so let me go back to sharing my PowerPoint. I'm almost done. Okay, so one of the things I definitely did want to share is a strategy resource that I think is really phenomenal. And I'm actually going to go live on this one too. I don't know why I even bothered to go back to the slideshow here. So Open Up is currently only available for 6-8. They are working on high school and K-5 right now. High school will be released before the K-5 one. So high school teachers, it's coming. But I'm looking at grade 8. All of the grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade right now that are there and free, have this kind of course guide and a lot of the exact same information on it. So I don't expect to see a whole lot of changes when they get the high school ones released either. But you can go to this course information and jump down to the supports pieces. So there's support for ELL and there's support for students with disabilities. I really like what they have here for a couple of reasons. One, I find it incredibly easy to read. There's not a whole lot of edgelingo. There's really straightforward information. It's they make it clear that this comes from a lot of research and from a lot of experts that they've worked with to really think about it. And they really connect like these strategies to the mathematics and show like why they suggest these. So I think there's a lot of really good things here. So I encourage everyone, if you want to go home or to spend some time looking over these too. So you can see they have a lot of the stuff that just says like big ideas, but then they even get down and talk about some more specifics for each of that. So that's stronger and clearer each time. So you can have them pre-write, make sure you provide more think time, structured pairing. They can switch with partners and things like that. And then a post write up. And you can continue through. There's a whole bunch of really, really good suggestions in here and strategies. So I also I know I'm showing you the English language learner ones and I'm going super fast, but let me also show you the students with disabilities, because I think a lot of these are great for all kids in all grade levels. So you can see there's some like big ideas that they really talk about as to how they utilize or how they develop their curriculum that you can use in your classroom. But then they have these more specific things down here. So eliminating barriers, right? Adding in more processing time. Are there peer tutors that you can help kind of partner them up with that will be helpful? Assistive technology. So I'm also in favor of having kids do a lot of their mathematics on paper and pencil, but there's definitely benefits to technology. And for some students, that's their best way to show you their understanding. And so don't be afraid to use technology if that's what's going to help your student be able to show what they know, right? And there's lots of different things out there to help do that. They have visual aids, graphic organizers, and brain breaks, which are certainly important, and we hear a lot about in K2, K5, but really high school's got a lot of pretty heavy math, right? And so it's worthwhile to consider some brain breaks when you get to high school for all students, and not just students that have ADHD and things like that, but lots of different things there. So I just wanted to show you that. To find this, I'm sorry, that's probably super annoying to watch me scroll. If you go into Open Up, it's free, and you can just go to the course guide, and then it'll have all this information, and you can choose the pieces that you want. All right, I think that might have been my last slide anyway. Any questions?
Awesome. We'll open it up now. If you have your camera available and can turn it on, that would be great. If you have, or if you have a microphone and want to turn it on, if you have any questions, we still have a little less than 10 minutes left. If you have an idea for differentiation that you want to share, or questions to ask either Janine, Glennah, Dana, or I, you certainly can ask. And I will use selective wait time here. I'm also posting something on the forum because Janine put it in the chat instead of in the forum, which is allowed. All right.
I only have one screen today. It's making me crazy. Usually I have like all these different things open. And
it does make it harder. I agree.
Yeah.
All right, any questions? We have a couple people on phones that I don't, I'm not sure who you are. If you want to introduce yourself. Otherwise, we have Mary Grace, Claire, Karen, Aubrey. Any questions or comments or additions? Glennah or Dana, do you guys have any questions for people or comments to share with them or each other?
Well, I just want to reiterate, I think one of the most important things when you think about differentiation is truly keeping at the forefront of your mind the entire time what the intent is of that lesson, right? So there's lots of options for differentiation. There's lots of different ways that kids can show you what they know, and lots of ways you can modify tasks to help them be more comfortable to work with that mathematics. But if you are not really thinking about the intent and what that standard is asking them to do, it's a struggle to make sure that they're really getting that opportunity. And none of us want to take away an opportunity from a student, right? So we definitely want to make sure that we're thinking about all those things. And the more you think about it in preparation for your lesson, the easier it is when you see kids struggling, and you can like just throw out those questions or those suggestions or those modifications a little bit faster.
Mary Grace is winning the award today for having the best chat conversation. Was somebody else going to talk?
No, I was just going to completely agree with Dana on that. You know, you've got to understand what the standard is asking our kids to do, how we want them to be able to demonstrate it, and then, you know, what level they're starting at and how we can get them to that end goal. Dana, thank you so much for sharing that coherence map. I have never seen that before, but that's awesome. So I don't know how I missed that, but it's great. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's useful. Mary Grace shared, not necessarily an idea, but something to keep in mind. When possible, I try to make my differentiation look similar to what other students are doing. So visually, she's talking about, so that it's differentiated, but that other students aren't necessarily called out by it. So the students get the support. She said also making sure to use data so that you're not just, so I'm not helping kids too much, as others have mentioned. If they don't need it, drop it. And Janine, I know you have a comment about using data rather than preconceived notions.
I do. And I love the way Glennah shared her data with us, and how you saw like a student might not be performing, they might not be a super high performer in one piece of content, but in another they could excel a little more. So just being careful that we don't pigeonhole our students as like, these are my low level learners and these are my high level learners, and just keeping them in these differentiated groups the whole year. Like those need to be fluid. We need to keep reassessing, and we need to keep adjusting where they're at. Like if we keep a student in that low level group all the time, then we're just going to make sure that they remain a low level learner, right? We're going to perpetuate that achievement gap. So if we can really keep assessing and keep readdressing and keep adjusting the supports that we're giving them appropriately, that will serve our students much better.
Yeah, I think that's great. And one more thing kind of along those lines is that sometimes it's just that day, right? Like we've all had a bad day where maybe our mind's somewhere else, we're just not feeling so well, and we just maybe need a little bit more support that day. Or the opposite, like we are having a stellar day. Like for whatever reason, school is going super well for us, and we could be challenged a bit more than what our teachers or what we've done in the past, right? So I think sometimes having some things available to the whole class, such as like hint boxes or something for the problems, which would be that they could go up and get a hint on their own if they feel that they need it that day, but we haven't necessarily like predefined that they are going to need these helps, so that gives them that option. It's one thing you can do. It's certainly not enough to get rid of other differentiation options, because that one kid who's going to have to go up for several hints every day isn't going to love that. But we all need a hint every once in a while, and so that's sometimes a way to do that and give them that space and time to still persevere in a problem. And extensions too. Like, all right, so you got this. Let's see if you can do this part now, right? Having that option available to all students, I think, is a nice thing to do.
So I just wanted to share. Go ahead, Janine.
Sorry. And when we present about differentiation too, we talk about inclusive differentiation, so differentiation strategies that are inclusive of every level of learner in your classroom. So like open problems or math talks, where they're approaching the problem with the skill set that they have available to them, but then they're comparing and contrasting all the different strategies that are shared out, so that it helps connect all of the different levels of strategies that are shared. And I'll stop there so that Heather can share her.
Yeah, I was just going to share, this was just released by TNTP. Is it the New Teacher Project? No,
So it's just TNTP. It was the New Teacher Project, but I think that they straight up just go by TNTP now. I don't think it's
great. But that was the original acronym.
It was, yes.
So just this, I believe October 1st, this came out. Maybe it was last week. But it's the opportunity. It was last week. But the opportunity myth, and they did a study of thousands of students, and to try to figure out what was the difference between where students were versus where students thought they were, kind of idea. How students are succeeding on most of the assignments that we're giving them. That students overall, I think it's like 72% of students are succeeding on the assignments that we give them, but only 17% of students are actually ready for the next grade level. And it's because of so many of these things that you guys have been talking about. The idea that we're not providing resources that take them to the level that we need to expect them to get to. Actually hitting the standards. I'm trying to think. Now that it's 4:30, I feel like I need to stop talking, but I feel like I haven't completed the thought. Dana, you've read more of it. What other things? I feel like it's.
I don't. Sorry, my brain's already on getting on my flight for Iceland now. So,
I
know. This is definitely worth a read. I would encourage everyone to read it. It's not so long.
It's 65 pages.
Well, but you can skim it, and there's things you don't have to read all of it.
And there's pictures. But it really talks about like how the resources we use, as well as the instruction that we provide, as well as the expectation, how those three components together are really what determines students' success. So last thing I will say is I will add this into the forum, but the last thing I will say is I did give you a link to, I will post it again here. It's already in the forum. I will post it again here to take to tell us about what you learned today, how you will use it moving forward, and to thank you so much for coming. Thank you especially to Glennah and Dana for sharing their time and their wisdom with us. And I hope to see all of you in 2 weeks from today. We will be talking about problem-based learning. So if you can join us, we'll have somebody from Illustrative Mathematics, which was the resource Dana was showing, as well as Ray, I can't remember how to say, Hugart? Is that how you pronounce it? And she is apparently an Instagram person that's got thousands of followers and thousands of Twitter followers, and she is from our home state of Illinois. So hopefully you'll be able to come back next week and see that. Thank you all. Have a great night.